So I think we're ready now for our speaker. David Weekley is the founder of pbWorks, a venture-backed startup that provides a suite of hosted collaboration solutions. pbWorks started as pbWiki. It was a side project that David started at the Super Happy Dev House. And I don't know if anyone's familiar with the Super Happy Dev House, but it's an event that David organized with some other folks where programmers get together and spend the night working on sort of a side project that they can hopefully complete all in one sitting and just put it out there and see what happens. So tonight we're going to find out from David how he bootstrapped pbWiki, a side project, into pbWorks, a venture-backed startup with products used by 24 of the top 25 US law firms, as well as educators and other businesses. So let's all welcome David, and I'll cede the floor to him.
Thanks. So I guess this is not exactly what 120 people look like, but these are the most hopeful people who figured out how to
Darwin.
the better half of the audience. Wonderful. So stop me at any point as I go through here, because the whole point is that this is a dialogue, and you get to interrogate my brain to see if there's anything useful in there for you. I've been at the startup game now for, I actually just passed my 6-year anniversary. So hopefully I've learned something, and hopefully I'll manage to share some of that with you here. Just in case you get bored and doze off or anything, I get to give you the last slide first also. Startups are tough. Data is really useful, and a lot of the lean startup community is all about data, but you also have to use your gut. The data can't just tell you what the right thing to do is. Put out a lot of ideas. Most ideas are going to be bad. When there is a good idea, spend your time on it, and that good idea, it turns out, is often bad if you don't continuously rework the good idea. And eventually, hey, maybe you'll make profit. So that's the executive summary. All right. So business is not sexy. You guys know that. Business is tough. Lean startups in particular, when you're starting lean, that means that you're poor, means you're short on all kinds of resources, all the sort of resources that are important to you. This means that you need to be really efficient. You also don't have any idea what you're doing. That's sort of the lean startup mantra, right? I mean, you don't know what you're building, you don't know for whom you're building, you're trying to figure out both of those things at once. This is complicated. It's okay, you'll figure it out. And also, you don't even know what strategic overall direction is right, and for the things that you know that end up being right, you don't know which parts are right. So you're gonna have to go and find that out. It's okay. Well, unless it's not okay, and there'll be a lot of it's not okay, but that's okay, because we'll keep on trying, right? And that's also another critical part of the philosophy of lean startups. You put out a lot of ideas. Most of those ideas, even the ones that seem wonderful, are bad. So it's important to find out as quickly and efficiently as possible which of your ideas are bad, as opposed to spending huge amounts of time and resources that you don't have invested in ideas that you thought were wonderful but turned out to be terrible ideas. So why does it work at all? These are a lot of things that don't really seem very flattering to talk about in terms of lean startups. What's the positive part of the philosophy here? And I think that really is, it's a combination of humility with hubris, that you know that you are good enough, smart enough, and well-liked enough and all that, that at the end of how all this is going to turn out, you're going to be okay, right? That you will ultimately have some idea that has merit, and you don't know which idea, and that's okay. So you're divorcing yourself from the specifics of any of the individual ideas that you come up with, as opposed to having an idea and making that idea your baby, and if that idea doesn't happen to work out, it means you're a stupid failure, right? So you need to have that separation there, right? And so you need to combine humility with hubris. Another important part of why this whole thing works is you're trying to use the scientific method as a tool in creating a business. So you come up with these different hypotheses about, I think the market's like this, I think this is a good way to implement this, and as quickly as possible you're finding out whether or not that actually is the case, whether or not that was actually a good idea, and then you iterate, you've got a better understanding of how the universe works, and you form new hypotheses and try again, right? So this is really what this really is a revolution of applying the scientific method to the foundation of businesses, to creating new businesses. And that's pretty cool. And it's kind of obvious when you say it like that, but for me, that's a lot of what the aha moment about the lean startup community is about. And there's also a very low bullshit factor, because at the end of the day, you need to be making enough money to actually eat. And whereas in various fields of science and so forth, you can go on wildly unproductive tasks, and that's okay. You can end up spending your life working on obscure stuff that's not useful to anyone. You can't really afford to do that if you're a lean startup, because ultimately you need to eat. So it keeps you honest, keeps you true, and that's pretty cool. So some people have taken the lean startup idea and said, well, I'll start with absolutely nothing. And I've actually seen a couple people try to do this. They'll toss up a website that has nothing on it. And it's just got a user voice plugin that says, what do you want me to implement? Right? And of course, what you have the rest for is like porn and dinosaurs, right? And this is not really lead to useful web services. You need to start with a stone in your stone soup. So you need to have a minimum viable product, but no viable product is not good enough. Just want to put that out there because I have seen people like run with the lean startup idea and say, I'll just start with the feedback form. And it's just not a great idea, but you guys do that because you're the half of the audience that can figure out how to get here. So you start with the simplest possible thing that could be useful to anyone. Let me tell you about the first version of pbWiki. I actually registered the domain name at 1 in the morning at the first super happy dev house and started coding it up. And I was thinking about what's the most ridiculously simple way I could implement the sign-up form. And I ended up reducing it down to, well, give me your email address because I don't want spammers, and so there's an email round trip, and give me the name of the wiki that you want, and I actually don't need anything else. And so the next button click, bam, you're on your new wiki. It's hosted at whatever wiki name you wanted, .pbwiki.com, which was for 2005 kind of novel. Now everybody does subdomains to make you feel special, but like that was pretty cool. And so like the front page had almost nothing except for a logo of a sandwich. So pbWiki, make your own wiki is fast as making a peanut butter sandwich, which is where the PB comes from, in case you guys didn't clue into that. Then what's your wiki name, what's your email address, go. And that was pretty much it. So real bare bones minimalist, and the actual wiki implementation itself was incredibly simple. I mean, we're talking about 300, 400 lines of PHP code, right? So it could not do very much. It could not do fancy things, but it was the simplest thing that could possibly be useful to anyone, and it turned out to be useful to quite a few people. And that was the stone in pbWiki's stone soup. So our motto in engineering for some time was ghetto but useful, right? Cobble it together as fast as possible. Don't care about how shiny the technology is. Focus on, could this be useful to somebody? Because it turns out that nobody cares about how shiny your technology is. More on how I learned that lesson later. So I'll be harping on this a couple different times in this talk, that even though you are data-driven, you still really need to rely a lot on hunches and creativity. And the most crisp way I could think of to sum up what this is about is that the market is an oracle. Like, how many of you guys are computer science and know what an oracle function is? Right. Few timid hands here. Yes, all right. So an oracle is something that tells you whether or not you're right. Right. So for instance, a login field that takes a password is an oracle. It tells you whether or not you got the password that you put in right. It doesn't tell you what password to put in to be able to log in successfully, right? And the market is this kind of an oracle function. It will tell you, yeah, that was a good idea. I'm excited about this. I want to pay money for this. I want to share this with my friends. Or, no, I am not interested. Go away. You bother me. It doesn't tell you what you need to build. Right, and there have been a lot of different product stories about this, right? Everything from Steve Jobs to Sony with the Walkman. That there's no way that a consumer group would have stood up and said, "You need to make this new product that does this, and that's going to serve my needs really well." Like consumers actually don't tend to do that, but they do tend to have a really quick reaction as to whether or not they think something is going to fill their needs really well. So just keep that in mind. You need your gut. That's what I'm saying here. So you need to be smart, and then put your smart ideas out there and then see which ones of those we're actually smarter about. So this means that instead of listening to customer-provided solutions, because those are often a little wonky, a little out there, ask them, why do you want this built? Like, what is your problem? But not like that. Like, what does your day look like? What do you struggle with, right? And to try to really see that and then think, what's the simplest way that I could make this person's life better, right? And you're going to need to get creative. And the data can't tell you what you need to build. So you need to use data to validate, to act as an oracle function for whether or not your hunches about the universe are right. So anyhow, this seems to sum up very nicely. Oh, great, deliver a lot of ideas, count on most of them to fail. This third point is really important and really tough, because I know that the lean startup community is about coming up with a lot of ideas and seeing which ones take off or not. You gotta drop everything except for the one that's taking off most. And that's really tough. I had that myself. I had like 4 different projects running at the point that I launched PBwiki, and it was emotionally tough for me to drop all the other services and just focus on one. But you gotta do that. You gotta cut out the chaff. And then, you know, even with your good idea, when the market rolls you in a new direction, you gotta roll with it. So, wonderful. All right, this sounds like a game plan. What are some of the catches? And like I said, data can't tell you everything. Right? So, how about, for instance, and this has come up as a puzzle point for me, and I hope this is the start of an interesting discussion in the lean startup community. What about low frequency events? Because we're all about A/B testing, we're all about multivariate testing, we're all about testing your hypotheses, but what if you're talking about something that in a success case looks like it happens about 3 times a day? Like, for instance, a $10,000 sale. If you're doing 3 $10,000 sales a day, you're doing pretty good. You're in pretty sweet turf right there, right? Now let's say you've got some changes in mind for the process that you're using to sell 3 things a day for 10,000 bucks, right? And you want to be pretty sure that, you know, this change that you've made actually is doing something positive, right? That, let's say I want to be 95% sure that I've made at least a 10% improvement in what my process was before. That sounds kind of reasonable, right? You know, I don't want to be like farting around and just randomly changing things up for the sake of change. I want to be sure that the changes I'm making are good. Well, there's a problem with that. Here's how the math works out. So the red line here is the 95% confidence interval, and what you see on the x-axis is the number of conversions on a logarithmic scale. And you'll notice that the purple line here is 75% conversion rate. So if you've done a 75% improvement from your baseline, you can actually, even with that kind of a dramatic level of improvement, only be sure of it after you've gotten about 90 samples or so. If you've actually made a change that gets a 25% improvement, it might be 500, 600 samples or so before you know with 95% certainty that you've made at least a 10% improvement. Man, that really sucks. Because that means that even if the change that you implemented was 50% better than the previous thing that you were working on, it's going to take you at least 3 months of A/B split testing to be sure that it's made at least a 10% improvement. Now, if you're testing other things at the same time, if you've got A, B, C, D kind of trials, it's going to take you even longer. This is pretty brutal, right? So what this means is, while you use the data to inform your decisions, you're going to need to trust your gut about what to optimize. So now I'm going to go and pitch a fallacy for you here. And how many of you guys know what this expression in Latin means? Okay, post hoc ergo propter hoc. Means, after it, therefore because of it. And this is a traditional fallacy that says that when the 2 things correlate, it doesn't mean that one causes the other, but that's sometimes true and sometimes not. So you need to use your gut to figure out what things in your business correlate really strongly with success and happen at a higher frequency than a conversion. That you think if you improve those things will end up improving your conversions. And so it's an extra layer of abstraction, and it requires that gut intuition about that being not just a correlating variable, but a causal variable being correct, right? So this is needing, again, human intuition. But you need to do that if you want to rapidly optimize chains with low conversion rates, right? So if you, yeah?
Can you give an example from PBwiki?
Sure. So if people are coming in to use our project edition, right, we know that those people convert for a whole lot of money, right, when they come through. But the path from somebody visits www.pbwiki.com to they sign up for a project edition to they actually go and pay for a project edition, it's like, so it's a really dramatic slewing in the pipeline, right? So this means that when we see that, for instance, engagement in the project edition very highly correlates with an ability to upsell, right? That more than 50% of people who make more than 10 edits in a PBwiki project, pbWorks project edition, are going to actually pay for it. That, hey, if we optimize for getting you to make at least 10 edits, there's a good chance that we're going to increase the chance of you converting through.
Did that work?
well, we're actually in the middle of running that experiment. So, yeah. So there's a number of cases, other cases where we have run this, where there are things that seem to correlate very well, and so we optimize for the higher frequency correlating variable as opposed to the end variable.
That did work.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah. There are some cases where you can game yourself though, right? Because if you like force the user to make 10 meaningless edits, in that case, you're probably not going to increase your success rate. You might even decrease it because you piss people off, right? So you have to be careful to not game yourself. But pay attention to those variables that correlate well with success, that are at a high frequency, and then you can run rapid experiments on them. Because sitting around and waiting for 3, 4, 5, 6 months to get data back on your experiments, it's not a fine enough granularity of experiment to run for a startup. Right? You have to be learning faster than that. So, I mean, what I'm saying here, and like I said, I would harp on this a few times, that human judgment is pretty key. That your gut and your intuition provides all of these core bits for what is the business, who am I going after, what is the approach that I should use, and then the market is just validating whether or not those gut calls were correct. So I want to make this case for humans and computers working together in peace and harmony. Yay, that's the way of the future. It sounds like something out of District 9 or something. All right. So let me talk a little bit now about my company and the experiences that I had, and hopefully that'll be interesting and relevant. So I started messing around as a software developer with private wikis back in 2002 when I was working for a virtual worlds company called there.com. And I was continuing to do this on the side and helping organizations I was involved with set up their own private wikis. In the meantime, I started my own company in 2003, and I was continuing to help other organizations I was involved with go and start up their own wikis. I kind of got sick of setting them up by hand because it was kind of involved to do, and there weren't a whole lot of, there weren't any hosted private wiki providers where these organizations could otherwise go and get themselves set up. So I said, these people should be able to service themselves. Let me make it easy for them. So at the first step house at 1 in the morning, I cobbled together the first version of pbWiki where people could set up their own wikis by hand. And 48 hours, list all my friends know, and about 48 hours later, I had about 1,000 groups signed up. So I'm like, wow, okay, I need to pay attention to this. It was a little bit of it was an act of humility. I had worked for the previous year and a half on a project called I Am Smarter. It's an instant messaging enhancement. And poured an enormous amount of technology and sweat and blood into that project. And then my silly weekend project, and the first pbWiki ever made, this is the truth, was called Shitfaced. This silly weekend project that I put together in 48 hours was eclipsing anything that I had done in the last year and a half. But at some point you have to say, ego be damned, I'm just gonna go and run with the thing that's working, right? Because when you succeed, people have a tendency to forget your failures. So that's the good news. That's why it's okay to fail a lot, right? Nobody remembers those things. I mean, people talk about Twitter a lot. How many people talk about audio? Yeah, what? Huh? I have no idea what that is, right? It's okay. So I hired my first employees full-time in November of that year, including Ramit Sethi to help me out with marketing, and some of you guys in this room I know Ramit, and Nathan Schmidt, my best friend, who's still our CTO. About a year later, we got a small round of angel financing, and we moved into an office, and that felt, oh, we're a real company now. And a couple months later, way before we needed it, but best time to take VC money is when you don't need it, we got a financing round led by More David. And they've been great for us, by the way. And we ended up, I hired a CEO to go and help me grow the company about a little more than a year ago. And that's been a great process too. So, was pbWiki itself a lean startup? Well, the sort of title of the talk kind of implies that it was, so I want to make a quick defense of why it might be. My first 3 years with the company were actually without any salary at all. That felt kind of lean to me. I was the only employee for the first 2 years. We had, I put together 3 different $20,000 rounds with friends and family, selling them just shares in the company to be able to keep the lights on and buy some servers and plug them in. One of the core bits that Eric had in his definition of a lean startup included lamp listanga, or lamp listanga. I literally would go driving around at night, buying servers off of Craigslist, like driving out to Fremont, like piling them in the back of my car, buying memory and fries, like I literally did bleed for my startup, going and putting memory modules into these very poorly designed servers and having cuts all over my hand. We ran a very rapid response customer forum where people could write in, and the founder, CEO, and the only employee of the company would write them back immediately with feedback, and often with, okay, cool, I fixed that. Thank you for writing in about that. Right, so this actually helped encourage a really vigorous community who was really excited because, gosh, that's really cool when you can give someone feedback and it immediately gets acted on. It's very empowering. There was a sense from our community that they were co-developing the software with us. In terms of the different products that I put out prior to PBwiki, I was originally thinking when I started the company in 2003 that it was going to be a hosted project management solution. That's kind of funny because it actually came full circle. I worked on an instant messaging enhancement called I Am Smarter for a year and a half, like I mentioned. And worked on a hosted capture solution called BotBlock that would have more or less been what reCAPTCHA was, and they got bought today by Google. That was today, right? Yeah. Then that was a little ahead of its time. I had probably the funniest one up here is an app called Single Status that would send you an email when someone you were interested in on MySpace changed their relationship status. I got a cease and desist from Fox Interactive saying I was interfering with their server operations and needed to stop running the service immediately, which I thought was kind of funny. I did a service called TWAP, which never actually launched. That was going to be like a web cron. And then PBwiki, which launched in 2005. And it's had a number of different editions. The funny part here is that we now have a project edition that does hosted project management. So you cannot escape your destiny. But the point in showing this slide is to illustrate that I made a whole lot of mistakes, some of which took me very substantial amounts of time. And the big lesson that I learned from I Am Smarter in particular was that I was so frustrated as an engineer that the market did not understand how cool my technology was. It's like, if only you guys got that I've got 4 patents pending on this, and that nobody else in the world has got a technology as cool as this. If you got that, you'd be as excited about it as I am. And the answer is, not really, because other people aren't engineers and they have things to do, and if you aren't helping them with their things to do, then they'll get really bored with you in a hurry.
Can I ask you, how do you come up with the idea? I mean, what was the problem you were trying to solve?
The problem I was trying to solve with I Am Smarter actually came out of the hosted project management concept. I saw people using IAM for more and more serious transactions, that people would discuss real business, would go and flesh out ideas over IAM, and there wasn't an infrastructure that actually took that seriously. So what I wanted to do is I wanted to have an infrastructure where, let's say, you, me, and her are all discussing a project over IAM, that those IAMs are logged against the project, right? And URLs get pulled out, dates get pulled out, email addresses get pulled out, and then associated with the project. So encouraging real productive use of IAM. Yeah, trying to treat IAM like a serious business platform. So.
Sounds like a great add-on to WebEx.
Perhaps. So that was the big lesson there, was that nobody actually cares how shiny your technology is. You gotta build things that are useful for people. Sure, it sounds pretty straightforward when you say it, but it's a tough lesson for engineers to learn. Because engineers want to believe that if you go and create something amazing, money, riches, fame, and all sorts of wonderful things will just go and fall in your lap. And that's just not true. So, life's tough. So I gotta move on. So how has pbWorks evolved as a business since we launched? Well, when I launched it, I thought it was going to be an ad-supported, free hosted service because, that was sort of the way that things were going, and I figured that wikis are largely textual, so Google would do a great job figuring out relevant ads to show these people, and they would monetize well, and I'd never have to charge anyone money. Cool, all right, done, game, set, and match. And then the checks from Google started coming in, and they didn't have nearly quite so many zeros as I was expecting. And I did some rough math around how many pages we would need to be showing to how many people. to generate, let's say, a $100 million a year business, nearly fainted and decided that probably wouldn't be the right direction for us to go. What's interesting is that some of our early competitors took huge amounts of money to go down exactly this path and are actually kind of having some serious difficulties now because they're running into this much later. So the good part was that that kind of model failed pretty quickly. We realized it wouldn't make us much more than beer money.
Who are those competitors? Who are those competitors?
Webpaint's one, up in Seattle. So they poured a lot of money into making a really shiny editor and then making sure that everything was free and putting ads on them. That didn't really work out so well, so they basically started trying to make official wikis for TV shows like Lost. It's like the official Lost wiki is hosted on Webpaint, which doesn't matter because the unofficial Lostpedia, which is fan run, gets like 40 times the traffic. But to a certain degree, Webpaint doesn't really care because ABC actually pays them good money to go and host the official Lost wiki, despite the fact that nobody uses it. So anyhow, those were some of the folks we were competing against early on. Then, as a matter of trying to get people to be less annoyed about the ads, I offered that, hey, you can pay $5 a month with a PayPal subscription and we'll remove ads from your wiki. And not really expecting that many people to take us up on it because who the hell pays for stuff online? And was very surprised to find an outswelling of support. A large number of people were willing to say, hey, we love you guys, we like your service, and that's cool that you remove my ads, but really I want to support you. So hey, here's $5 a month, keep up the good work. And that's something interesting just to flag is that in your early days you will find this group of people who may not be your long-term customers, but they are very, very helpful early on because they'll give you lots of detailed feedback, they will give you money, they'll give you time, they'll do peer support. They literally will spend hours in your forums supporting other users, like just doing wonderful work like that. The stuff that you have to watch out for is that they'll also tell you things like, if you don't have better microformat support, your service won't take off, et cetera, et cetera. So you have to watch out for a little bit of the tech bubble, but they are a wonderful kind of training wheels market for getting you ramped up into being a real company. The next thing that we tried was we tried tiering different freemium wikis. It became clear that we had some larger business customers. At one point our pricing model was $5, $10, $25 a month. And I got off a 45-minute call with the CIO of Accenture and 4 of his coworkers, and the result of which was that, yes, they were going to sign up for the $25 a month plan. God, okay, we need a different pricing model. This is wrong, right? That was really painful. It's good to have those moments, right, when you realize that there are people who are fleecing you. Who are clearly finding more value in their product than they're paying for. That's a good position to be in because you can fix that. The opposite position is a lot more awkward. We tried a number of experiments. There were a number of directions here, evolutionary forks that kind of died off. One of them was we thought for a while that actually we might get into the paid content business, that we would let people go and host content like an ebook on our site and then charge other people access for it and we would take a cut. That actually performed horribly. But it was an interesting concept. It's the sort of thing where you could see in a parallel universe, maybe that works really well, and that turns out to be the whole business model of where we go. That wasn't this universe. So, we then ended up finding out that a whole lot of educators were using our product. We had a hunch that quite a few were. I was thinking around 5%, 10% of our user base was in the educational market. We decided to go and put an interstitial in. So if you're the administrator of a wiki, when you're going to log in, before you could do anything else, we said, what are you doing here, right? There's one of 7 different categories of stuff, just pick one, and I'll let you go and continue on to your wiki, but gun to your head, you need to tell me what you're doing. And we were expecting, as I said, 5, 10% would say they're in education. 45% of users said they were in education. K-12, community colleges, universities. So we're like, wow, okay, we need to pay attention to these guys because they're, well, half of our user base. So we came up with a bunch of different educational versions and focused the company for about 1.5 years on providing educational solutions. What took us out of a focus on that exclusively, although we do to this day have like a pretty good suite of educational offerings, was realizing where this went. So how many of you know like the courseware management market? CMS market, like they're in? Okay, a couple of hands. What's the one company in that space? Blackboard, that's right. They defined the space. They were like 98% of the market. It used to be they were like 75%, and then they bought their one competitor, and it's now kind of a monopoly. So you can actually get market sizing data very easily, just like read their, read their SEC filings, and that's how big that market is. And it was about $100 million a year, which is not money to sneeze at, and they were valued at about $1 billion. But you realize that the point that you get to be, let's say, $2, $3, $5 million, every dollar that you earn is going to have to come out of their mouth. And boy, are they going to go down fighting for that stuff, right? So we were like, okay, well, that might limit how well we do in that direction. What are some other directions that we could go? And we noticed that some of our business customers were coming in saying, hey, we've paid for SharePoint across our organization, but it sucks. I don't know if some of you guys have had similar experiences with SharePoint. But people were willing, managers were willing to pay money out of pocket to go and use pbWiki, now pbWorks, over SharePoint. And ostensibly, Microsoft certainly has claimed huge numbers around their sales of SharePoint, like north of $1 billion actually. It's like, okay, well, it's a giant market being underserved where some of these people already know about us and already started to spread us. Wow, this sounds like a really promising direction for us. So what's the right model that we have of attacking that, going business SaaS and enterprise SaaS? So we launched our business workspace that just is a single workspace for a company to use at $8 a user a month. And then a few months ago, we actually launched our project edition that provides much more comprehensive enterprise collaboration, including tasking, scheduling, stuff like that. And that's priced at $20 a user a month, and that's actually taking off. What's really interesting is to see as the product evolves. We talked to people 6 months ago about using our what's now our standard edition at $8 a user a month. They said, this is wildly overpriced for a hosted wiki. You need to give me crazy discounts on this. This doesn't make sense. That now we're coming back to them with Project Edition and showing them what it can do for their company, and they're saying, $20 a month, per user, no problem at all. Like just going in, no resistance at all to that. So it's really interesting to observe how customer price points and customer sensitivities change dramatically when you get bucketed in different mental categories. It's actually one of the main reasons why we changed our name from pbWiki to pbWorks, was that the word wiki was getting commoditized. That when people called us up and said, hey, we hear you have a great hosted intranet. Hey, we hear you have a great way for me to work with my clients. Anything else other than wiki, they kind of got our value. But whenever they called up and said, hey, we hear you have a wonderful wiki solution that was code speak for, I'm never going to pay you any money. So we had to struggle with that. I think that having wiki in the name early on was very helpful because I didn't need to explain what it was. That's how we got away with having almost no marketing materials at our start, because people were like, it's a wiki, it's hosted, it's private, you guys are just about the only provider out there, okay, I'll use you. Like I didn't need to say anything more. I didn't need to give them white papers. I didn't need to give them webinars. And the good and the bad of where we've developed now is now we do need to give them white papers, now we do need to give them webinars, but they really get how we can go and help them solve their business problems versus just being another commodity tool they've got at their disposal. And of course, we've got some really exciting stuff coming in February that I'm working on. So what's the model we use inside pbWiki? Well, it's real rapid release. Yes, different people have different definitions of this. Eric's definition of rapid release blows my mind. Have you guys heard like how fast they were releasing software at MView? Was it like 20, 30 times a day? Like, it's a little faster than we do things in pbWiki, but we do like 2 to 5 deploys a week, and we think that's reasonably rapid. It's rapid enough, I hope. We use an agile development methodology to turn out releases pretty quickly. And just like at the beginning, our focus is on how useful we are to users. Continuing to ask what's the simplest thing that we can do. Trying to take the lesson of I'm Smarter, saying like we don't really give a crap about technical fanciness. We don't really care about the long feature lists that our competitors have. We care about what are our users trying to do, what are our users struggle with. And sure, if there are things that our competitors do that help users, where users are like, wow, this really solves my need well, then like we'll pay attention to that. But paying attention to who else is in the marketplace and what sort of laundry list of features they roll out and trying to be feature competitive with them, man, you are going to lose bad. You need to focus on making people happy. And then ask your users what the heck they're doing, because sometimes they will really surprise you. So here are a couple of questions that really changed the company. And I want to walk you through these because your company, as it evolves, will have a couple of these big pivot points. And I tried to distill some of the big pivot points for PBwiki here. I was very surprised to find out that people were willing to pay for a hosted internet tool. That was not something that I thought people would, and that completely changed the business. It made it really crystal clear when I put that out there that a paid subscription business would be the way to go. And that may have saved the company instead of like just trying to plow down I'll try new ad units, I'll try dancing monkeys, I'll try, refinance your home like dancing girls. Like, no, actually we're gonna be a paid tool. So that was a pivot question for the company. The second question here, this was actually when we really got, in addition to the interstitial, asking what people are doing with the wiki, we had people come up to us all in a flood saying, hey, I loved your presentation in Chicago. I've been an avid user of PBwiki since then. And we were baffled. We were, what presentation in Chicago? None of us gave a presentation in Chicago. And it turned out that a really passionate teacher had given a full conference-length track on using PBwiki in education at a Chicago conference. And had spoken to hundreds and hundreds of teachers who had then gone off and started using it and liked it and started spreading it. And that was actually kind of the genesis of our explosion within the education market. So that was really big. Like sometimes, like when you hear things like great presentation in Chicago, you might blow it off as like, okay, this person's just crazy, because there are crazy people on the internet. But in this case, we dug under it a bit, and we ended up surfacing that our business was changing under our feet. So that was definitely a pivot question for us. And then likewise, the pivot out of the exclusive focus on the education market came from an internal question. Actually, to be fair, David now, our VC, helped us ask this question. It's like, how big can you get in this market? And that's one thing that VCs are very good at, is trying to prod you into the biggest possible opportunity to go and tackle. They won't be happy if you run even a very successful lemonade stand. They want you to be $1 billion business, and they will shove you in that direction, sometimes more or less forcefully. And the next question was also an internal question. At the point that it became clear that where we were going was ultimately going to be an enterprise SaaS company, I needed to ask myself about the company that I had started. Am I passionate about enterprise sales and marketing? And the answer is not really. I'm a product guy. I started programming at 5. I majored in computer science my 3rd week at Stanford. Like, I love building stuff. I love coding stuff. Like, that's really where my passions lie. And that I couldn't leave that aside and go focus on enterprise sales and marketing. And that was what the company needed in order to get ahead. I mean, ultimately, what these companies become is you've got a product that's pretty darn good, right? That then needs to get in people's hands. It needs to get monetized. So it becomes a sales and marketing exercise. So that was the point at which I decided that I needed to go and get a really kick-ass CEO to go and make me rich. And actually did. Found a guy who sold his first company to Apple for tens of millions, his next company to Oracle for hundreds of millions, and thought he could do even better with PBwiki. I was like, all right, go make me rich, right? And it's an important point for a founder to get to that point. I mean, you take a look at Branson and Buffett, for instance. Both of those guys have built careers off of finding operators who could skillfully execute an idea and make both of them rich. So I think it's important that we have role models like that we keep in mind, and not just fixate on folks like Ellison or Gates that go and take it all the way up. Because really, it's like, can you create things that are success, right? And that's what it comes down to. It shouldn't really matter, are you the CEO or not? It's all about like, can you create value? So, and that's actually been remarkably positive. I heard umpteen horror stories about, my God, what happens when you hire on a CEO if you were the founding CEO. And if there's any sort of hubris in it, if there's any sort of, this is my company, don't you dare mess things up, it's probably not gonna work. So you need to both come into it and say, okay, well, here are the things I bring to the table, here are the things I bring to the table, let's have respectful dialogue about these things. And we've been together now for a year and a half, and it is a beautifully positive relationship. So I'm here to tell you that it is possible, and it is a great thing when it works well, to go and bring in the CEO to help you out. I mean, Google is another good example of where the founders went and brought in a CEO and had it work out pretty well in a happily ever after scenario. And then the last pivot question up here is one that I'm in the middle of answering, and this is a lot of fun. This is why I'm enjoying coming into work in the morning. And the question was actually posed by my best friend, Nathan. And he asks about a lot of different things. Why do things not look like they are in the movies? It's like, you know, sometimes there are ridiculous movies, you know, like Hackers, which have, you know, how many of you guys saw that movie, Hackers? Yeah, it's a virus, right? And you're sort of like swimming through 3D bits of data. Even Jurassic Park, like, this is Unix. I know Unix, right? That's a mouse. That wasn't a computer mouse at all. It's a new building. Anyhow. But for some things, like Minority Report, right, they actually have neat, cool ideas about how people are accessing data, right? Like in 24, like the CTU has got some like neat, magical bits of data. And what's so cool about the movies is that they're focused on how do I solve these people's needs without a real need to focus on how would you actually implement it. You know, are these technologies hard enough? They're not worried about that stuff. They're just like, would it look cool? You know, it doesn't seem like it's doing a good job serving the user. And so that kind of struck me, and I thought, this is a constructive exercise. So what I'm gonna do is I'm gonna sort of mentally disengage from where the pbWorks technology base is right now and fantasize about what the ideal collaborative experience should look like without any regard to how difficult or simple the technologies to implement that vision would be, and kind of write some science fiction. And I literally mean, like, write some science fiction about what how your ideal user would go through the day. Right? Agile development considers this kind of like a user stories, but these are fantastic user stories, right? And then once you have that written down, and this is sort of like a product brainstorm effectively, so don't constrain yourself to technology that you know how to build. Then go and systematically take a look at what's the simplest way that I could take a step towards bringing this vision to fruition. Like, eliminate the magical bits, and what is the core of what I've fantasized the world should be like here? And can I really actually make that true? And what you might find more often than not, actually I can. Actually, there's this little bit here, and nobody's ever pieced together this technology like this, but wow, that would be really useful. And so I'm in the middle of actually going through an exercise like that, and within the next few months, you should start to see some really exciting changes in pbWorks that enable people to collaborate in a whole new way. And so I just want to pass off this exercise to you guys as being remarkably constructive, because nobody ever fronted me with something like this that said write science fiction, you know, as a programmer and then go build it. And that's a really refreshing feeling when you're like, you wake up in the morning, you're like, I'm implementing science fiction. that can really get your blood pumping. So it's quite exciting. So in terms of the goals of a business, it's really just all about making money. Don't try to get your company bought. Don't worry about the IPO market. That's probably not going to be possible for some time. We'll see what happens with Sarbanes-Oxley. The acquisitions are real but rare. Like, kudos to Mint, which sold this week for what, 170 million to Adobe. So like Intuit. So I mean, these things are out there, but they're a little bit like lottery tickets, right? And you don't want to make your business premise that, you know, we're making lottery tickets, right? You want to actually create real value. And the best way to judge whether or not you've created real value is whether or not your company is making money. Now, it leaves lots of options open, like IPOing or getting bought out, or just sitting around and making whole huge piles of money, like the guys at Hotternot did for a number of years. They just kind of sat around and drew multi-million-dollar salaries, and like, who could really laugh at them and say, you know, you guys are failures because you haven't IPO'd when you're making a multi-million-dollar a year salary and working 10 hours a month. So it's a pretty good way to be, right? And it's funny how, it's funny the tone you hear in a venture capitalist voice when describing a lifestyle company. Right? I mean, how many of you guys have heard that kind of tone? Like, oh, well, are you building a lifestyle company? Come on, as an entrepreneur, if you can make something that's making huge bank and pay yourself out of that, like, you have succeeded, period. Right? Sure, you didn't earn a return for an investor, but big whoop-de-doo, you don't give a shit about that. So the name of the game when starting a business is to make money. I'm sorry it's obvious, I just needed to say it, because sometimes that gets forgotten in Silicon Valley.
VC, why'd you take VC, or why are you doing that?
Because we realized how we could grow, and we also saw that there were a lot of other big folks who were coming into our space, and that we would need to grow faster in order to be competitive with them. Like at the start, if somebody had approached me when I was starting the company and said, hey kid, you seem smart, here's $5 million, go kick some ass. I wouldn't have known what to do. I'd have put, 4.9 million of it in a CD, thrown a big party, and fed myself for like the next year and a half. Right? I mean, I wouldn't have known what to do. I wouldn't have known how to leverage that. And really, what became clear is as we were growing the business was how we would leverage an investment, how we would grow faster with that investment in a meaningful way that would return on that investment. But then also, from a market pressure perspective, that we would need to do so. And sussing out which of that is real and which of that is fake is actually a very difficult exercise. Do you actually need to grow faster or not? And there's some cases where you really do, and there's some cases where you can get away with just a really long time horizon and like a 30, 40, 100-year exit.
Are you in a position to be able to just lifestyle business it for a while?
Yeah, and that's actually quite interesting, is that we were at a point about, I want to say like 2.5 years ago, we were at a point 3 years ago where it was basically just 3 of us, all working out of our homes, all on minimal salaries, but we were cash flow positive and we were growing. And we could have kept it like that. And it would have continued to run itself as a business, and our salaries would have slowly grown. And from a certain perspective, that would be success. I think honestly, some of it is a sense that I'm not sure that I want to be at pbWorks in 20 years. I'd like to go and do some other things too. And being able to grow faster enables you to build up an infrastructure faster where it's running itself. And you can get run over by a bus or go start something else, and that thing will keep running. Because it would be very difficult with a 3-person company to have one person decide that I'm bored, I want out, or something happens to them, God forbid, right? Then you kind of have to shut down the business because it's really resting on those 3 people. And it was emotionally really interesting to watch PBWiki develop into something that was truly independent of me, where I can help push the snowball down the hill faster, but the snowball will roll, right? So I don't think we could have gotten to that point anywhere nearly as quickly if we hadn't had venture capital. So here's the executive summary again, in case you missed the first slide because it came in partway through the talk. Startups are tough and fast. You got to use your gut. You can't just you have the data tell you what to do. You'll have lots of bad ideas. That's okay, because hopefully some of your ideas will be good ideas. When you do have a good idea, you need to pay attention to how you need to evolve it. And eventually, hey, you'll make some money. So what's the whole point? I don't know, I mean, you have seen this shirt, but the whole point is to get excited and make things, because it's pretty cool when you're going out there and building things that are immediately available to a substantial percentage of the world's population because you put them online, and you've got people from all over the globe who are playing your games, who are using your collaboration services, who are getting laid, who are making friends, all of these different things because you took the time to sit down and write some software. So on behalf of the world, thank you.